news! I'm back already. So, what's for dinner then?
What do you mean you're back?
No, I'm back from war. Brilliant news. They're not having a war anymore. It stopped. Fantastic.
The war's ongoing. What?
Yeah. Let's have what are we having for dinner? Muscular tuna? Oh, have muscular tuna.
But no,
muscular prince tuna.
You're not having muscular tuna. What are you talking about? I don't understand why you're back.
There's no war. I get to be with you guys. It's great.
You were
meant to die, Dad.
No. The war's over. I know. Yeah, that was the plan. But the war's over now. It's fine.
But none of the other planes have come back.
Sorry?
None of the other planes have come back.
Oh no! I've got it mixed up. I've got it all mixed up again. I can't go. I'm going to be late if I go now. And also, I've only got half a tank. I've only got enough petrol to get there. I haven't got a return journey anyway.
Well, that's because it was a one-way journey into history.
What do you mean?
You were meant to die. Why are you here?
That doesn't sound that great. No, it's better than I'm here, probably.
Yeah. You're no longer the father we love.
Yeah.
Well, that's a bit harsh.
I think just go sit in the corner and be silent, okay?
What? Tuna? They'll get over this.
Cracking conversation, analytical interpretation, and igniting imagination with the Little Lang Gang.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Little Lang Gang. It's been a little while since we spoke to you, but we're here to talk you through the final poem in the anthology, which is Beatrice Garland's Kamikaze, if you hadn't guessed by that wonderful opening there. Virtually with us, you have myself, Miss Graham.
Miss Gough.
Oh, Mr. Grimmett.
Every time!
I get confused how you do that every time. I feel like you can introduce me, but then you don't.
I just like you to have your own voice, really.
Yes.
Wonderful. Right, so, if I'm honest, I don't feel that confident on Kamikaze. It's probably one of my least favourite in there. But Miss Gough, bless her, has done quite a bit of research on it to enable us through this poem. And as always, we're going to start with the context. So
yeah, I've got quite a lot of context.
I also will remember...
What?
What was that?
Well, that completely broke up there, Mr. Grimmett.
I said I'll remain silent. I can't. Okay, so...
Oh, yeah, that we asked you. Yeah. Oh, we got it. Right. There is a lot to do with the context. I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
Mr. Grimmett, just let Miss Gough speak.
This is why you shouldn't have spoken, you know? You was asked to stay silent. So, Kamikaze...
Sorry.
They were Japanese. It was a Japanese suicide pilot in World War II. Their aircraft were loaded with explosives and sent to missions to fly into enemy warships. Inevitably, the pilot would die in these attacks. I've got quite a bit about like the concept of shame and like the kamikaze oath that I'm going to run through. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, I'm not going to send you all to sleep, but it should be useful.
That's interesting.
So
it's good, yeah.
The shame surrounding this like cultural context and Bushido. Bushido code is the origins of the kamikaze, and I'll lead to that a little bit in a second. So shame brought upon the family when the father comes home, having abandoned the kamikaze directive. So as readers, when we read through this poem, we understand the shame may have shifted over time and does not necessarily transcend towards the cultural context, as we're so far removed from it. So some may see shame as embarrassment mixed with guilt. Some people might have seen it as a negative experience, and some people will see it as something private, something that's experienced and processed internally. So through this poem, we really get a sense of the private becoming public, to kind of show you what was happening behind closed doors. Now, in terms of the Bushido code, that's a pre-modern Japanese samurai culture. The notion of shame was a powerful public concept, even while rooted in the innermost depth of an individual's dignity. So shame was a desired quality for a samurai or a kamikaze pilot, or soldier as they're called. So they felt honour in feeling shame. And it's tied up with pride, dignity and honour. It's to do with their social mutation, not representation. Do you want me to run through the soldier's oath as well?
Yeah, go for it. This is more than I know.
Yeah. Can I just start? So a samurai soldier would enjoy feeling shame because there's honour in it. That would give them the opportunity to commit suicide and regain respect and honour from their community. Yeah. And that was how they would be respected by killing themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And the shame that the guy has in this, the father, they wouldn't have respected that shame because he didn't fulfil his journey, basically, his purpose.
Right.
So the soldier's oath then, it exposes how demanding the oath was on them and just how much they had to sacrifice. So they must make loyalty his obligation. A soldier must make propriety his way of life. A soldier must highly esteem military valour. A soldier must have a high regard for righteousness. A soldier must live a simple life. Sorry. Just dogs in the background. I'm going back for that. Can't control them. I don't know if there's anything else I need to say for context. Apart from, kamikaze pilots were given intensive training prior to their suicide missions. They were put through daily physical punishment and were given a manual which detailed how they were to think and prepare and then attack. All of these, along with others, were meant to put the pilot in the mindset in which he would be mentally ready to die. So it's really interesting that the pilot we're faced with in this poem isn't mentally ready.
It's quite interesting then that he turns around because he goes, I mean, obviously it goes without saying they go through a huge amount of training. I suppose I just never really thought about the training as a part of it. So for him to turn around, that is probably years worth of training and preparing.
He's sacrificed, yeah.
That he actually does make a sacrifice.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
There is a modern context to this as well, isn't there, though? Because as modern readers, we can't help but link suicide bombers with the kind of terrors of 9/11 now.
Yeah.
So it does. I mean, when was this poem written? I mean, we've got to assume that the writer is probably not in favour necessarily of soldiers killing themselves in such ways.
I think she's questioning the kind of ancient oath that they had to swear, and the validity of it in modern day. I'm going to just find out when it was written.
Because there's also that thing as well of, we read this poem and as a Western 21st century audience, hearing about a soldier coming back from war is incredibly positive. But
exactly.
Because of the cultural clash, the cultural conflict, let's use the word of the anthology, it's almost like we don't understand or we struggle to empathise with his family why he wouldn't be happy that he returned. But in turn, they probably wouldn't empathise with us with the thrill that people do return because there would be respect in death. Because I think the thing that always gets me with this one, because I'm not a huge fan, is that I find that the conflict's actually really subtle. I think if you read through it first time, and I was saying to Miss Gough before we recorded today that I often worry that Kamikaze itself as a story is quite simple. It's a story about a kamikaze pilot who flies home and comes back. But the way it's written and the actual conflicts presented in it, I feel very subtle and quite difficult. I feel it's a challenging poem masquerading as one that's quite simple.
Yes.
Yeah, until you start to delve a little bit deeper. And to answer your question as well, when this was written, it was in 2013, and it was published in her anthology, The Invention of Fireworks.
So
right.
It's a very recent
it was written after 9/11. So I think there would be an influence there. The interesting thing in this poem, I think, is that she doesn't really, apart from saying powerful incantations, go into why it is good in that culture for a soldier to kill themselves. So there's not a huge effort on her part to really explore that. And I think maybe that omission or lack of explanation does imply that suicide is in war is a negative, really, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's what she's kind of getting at, because she's, I mean, again, I don't know a huge amount about Beatrice Garland herself, but presuming Western, and maybe is critiquing Kamikaze as a fighting style, as a combat style. Either way, it's quite a lot more context than I've got written on my poem, so well done, Miss Gough.
That's all right. You're welcome. Now we
Language.
I'll talk about the structure in a minute and how we've got two different kind of voices coming through here. But it starts with that imagery of the Japanese imagery of the land of the rising sun, with her father embarked at sunrise.
The flag's at sunrise, isn't it?
Sorry, I've just looked outside and talking about sunrise, and it is bucketing it down.
It is pouring it down.
English, but
so I thought you were going to swear. I thought you were going to swear, Miss Gough.
No, it's chucking it down.
I think it's quite.
This imagery
Yeah, go on. You finish first. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Is the sun a flag? I know you didn't mean me. The sun is the flag, isn't it, for Japan?
It is, yeah. Yeah, so we've got this, it's dramatic, isn't it? It's dramatic imagery, but also the sun we associate with hope.
Yeah, positivity.
And power.
It's like an adventure. Yes. I feel this is like an adventure beginning at this point. It's sunrise with a sword and a flask of water. It sounds quite exciting.
Definitely.
And also, I mean...
contrast with his dying respect.
Yeah. And I know... You said we'll later come back to the structure of the two narratives, but I think even her father, the third person, even because that's linguistic, that's very detached from any emotion, and a distance between, it isn't actually the pilot's daughter telling the story, although she comes in later.
No.
It's
a bit like Ozymandias with that, isn't it?
Exactly what I was going to say.
Story told by someone else,
and that detachment.
And maybe that's what they're saying is. The reality of the Kamikaze pilots when they had to swear this oath is that detachment from everyday life, if you think about it, because they were having to make this mental journey to prepare to die. So they are detaching themselves in some way there too.
Yeah.
Because they've got the shaven head full of powerful incantations. So everything that once defined them has now been replaced by this enforcement of honour.
Yeah.
Oh, so the shaven head is getting rid of their identity, really. They're becoming a human bullet, really, aren't they?
Nice metaphor, I like it.
Thank you. That's not in the poem. Don't write that in yourself.
And then it moves into the part where it's like we've got enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. So that journey into history is metaphor for honour, supposed to be a one-way journey to death, and they're meant to be remembered. But obviously, I think even with like most recent events, I think we know that history itself sometimes is very colourful, very controversial. So yeah, maybe that's what she's trying to bring light to here, is this idea that history isn't always clean cut. Perhaps
I think as well that line is like.
There's this.
I would say it's like packed full of irony as well. Fuel for a one-way journey into history. That ironically he'll. You can read it, I guess, a couple of ways. Ironic that he will not be remembered as a glorious soldier, and therefore not remembered at all, or he's not remembered as historically like an incredible person. He's remembered as a failure. So whether he's remembered or not, either way, it's ironic because he does return.
Yeah.
He has been remembered, hasn't he? Actually, the poem exists.
Yeah.
So he has been remembered, but actually not enough to know his name.
Yeah, nameless.
It's like, if he had died, maybe the poem would be referencing with his name. Yeah. It's almost like he's become no one, really.
Yeah, but I wonder, it's so interesting, because when you think about that, I mean, obviously we'll get there, but the line at the end, would have wondered which is the better way to die. I think it's like, he's remembered, but I bet his family wish he wasn't. Because of the shame that he's brought on them. So they want to forget him, but unfortunately he's like lingering there as this constant reminder of failure.
Yeah.
It's a shame, isn't it? And that's
a bit like me in my family, in my house.
You're not a failure, Mr. Grimmett.
You're not a failure, Mr. Grimmett.
Thank you.
That kind of allusion to the failure, and I'm going to allude to this. It's within the first three stanzas, actually. You'll probably notice there's a lot of fricative sounds, so repetition of the F, And then we've got lots of sibilants as well. So you've got sunrise, samurai sword, shaven, and I'm just going to go through some of the fricatives like father, flask of water, full of powerful, fuel for. And I've picked this out and said that it's like, because it's air that's coming through a small space with use of the fricative sound, it could be the sound brought about by the buzzing of the planes as they're about to take off. It also evokes this unpleasant kind of anxiety-filled sensation, I would say. Sorry, I'm waffling.
No. It was the second you said about the noise of the planes, and I was like, I'm going to wait because I know Mr. Grimmett is going to go or something.
I know. Couldn't be not done. There's a very famous swear word. One of the most popular begins with F. I do feel that to get out anger, it's like I don't know. Yeah. I don't think you could write about this in an essay, really, but I think it is.
Fricative sounds
it's very frustrated. It's a frustrated
They're
sound.
They're forceful, angry sounds, which is why that particular swear word is often used because it embodies frustration and anger, doesn't it? So it's more effective, which is why, actually, interestingly enough, kids, a lot of swear words use fricative or plosive sounds because they are very aggressive.
Can you give some examples, please?
Sure, no problem.
Can you
imagine if I just went on a rant of all the swear words?
So I wasn't ready to move on. It's just I was rudely interrupted.
Sorry.
The use of both the fricatives and the sibilants, there's this like something's lurking in the background because it litters those first three stanzas. So it's making the reader uncomfortable because we get this real sense of the uncomfortable mood of the poem. So the fricatives create almost a hiss as well. It's like that reminder in the back of his head that you have got a duty to do, but that hiss is foreshadowing the shame that he's going to face when he returns home. And I've counted it up. There's 18 fricatives in the first three stanzas and none in the last two. So maybe that symbolises the silence he's subjected to. And
right.
Perhaps.
You filled your time at home really well there.
I have.
Time off work. One.
I mean, like, all you need to do is look at my anthology to see that I just absolutely love annotating.
Oh my gosh.
So neat.
I mean, I need to redo mine because mine went missing. I don't know where mine went. I've lost it, so I'm going to have to start again.
I mean, I've got your A-level one, so I'll return that to
I know you've got my A-level one. I know you've got it, and I'm going to need it back next year.
You are.
Yeah. Miss Gough has this lovely habit of taking my texts, and then I'm like, oh, God, I lost that ages ago, and then it turns up in your classroom.
Yep. So if anyone from the English department's missing books, it's probably with me. Yeah. I do apologise in advance. Right, let's move on to the second stanza because I realise I've spoken at length about other things.
We're 15 minutes in now. 16 minutes and a half.
Oh, sorry.
We are long.
That's a habit of mine, isn't it?
Don't be silly.
Enjambment there.
Children.
We do
have enjambment. It's kind of like that stream of consciousness, isn't it? I think that's what it's trying to resemble.
I like the way that, like, I mean, again, I don't know if it's structural or language, I don't know where you put it, but every stanza, pretty much, I can only see one stanza on my screen at the moment, one page even, but they start with those connectives, don't they? But, and. So it's like this, like Mr. Grimmett said, with the continual connectives plus the enjambment. I mean, actually, this whole thing is up until a point. I'm just looking at the first page. It's one sentence.
Yeah.
Up until dangerous.
Where's dangerous? Is it on the second?
Third from the end.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's all So up until the penultimate stanza, it's all one sentence. It makes it really hard to read when you read it out to your classes. I'm always just kind of gasping for breath.
Do you think as well? You know, you've mentioned that most of the stanzas start with those kind of their interjections like but and. That's kind of to show that thought process. It's almost like that doubt, that sense of doubt constantly there, eating away at him. But if I do this, and if I do this, this is what's going to happen. So he's really starting to he's having an existential crisis, I feel.
He is, definitely.
Yeah, he's questioning everything. And we've been speaking about the boats, like the fishing, and because there's a lot about fish in this poem. And it's like, what the hell does it mean?
Oh,
It's
what are
been
those
something we've
fish
kind of
about? I don't
thinking
get it.
over. Well, obviously, there's a lot of nature imagery, so that's what the fish resemble, and like the beauty and the that's what they resemble, you know.
Nice. Well, he's got a shaved head, just like those fish.
I mean, I was
Shaved
just
fish.
about to say,
Have you ever shaved a fish?
Yes, they do.
I'm talking rubbish now. Sorry. But I would say later on, there's a lot of there is a bit where one fish swiveled towards the sun, so the animals are reflecting his movements.
Yeah,
turning.
It's like
You have
the spinning of a plane, isn't it?
But it's all, when he turns around. But it's almost saying that to turn and to change your mind is natural. So if something is natural, it probably shouldn't be condemned too harshly.
No.
Yeah, I
That's a
agree.
nice way of thinking of it. Yeah, so he's obviously, there's a lot of like references to the like green, blue, translucent sea. So it's looking at the sublimity of nature and the peace that it resembles, which is a real contrast to the kind of violence that is associated with the Kamikaze pilot and their mission that they're on. So it's almost like that. He's really focusing on it because it's that beauty of life. And he's looking at things that are unaffected. He's looking at the innocence of the fish, and he thinks about his own family.
Well,
and when we think of the dark shoals of fishes,
well, because the fish would also
this is something
be.
I had to have a little look more into. Miss Graham, stop making faces.
No, I'm putting faces because I kept interrupting you and I kept trying to stop myself.
Well, it's very rude. Very rude.
Because fish swim in shoals, don't they? They're all together. It kind of links to this idea of family and like society, and how if one of you like moves away from that, like the consequences of what you do is not just going to affect you, it affects the whole community as well. So it's this idea that it's going to bring complete shame. So although flashing silver might be that little glimmer of hope he sees, it's also it's also a warning or a threat, I'd say, that flashing silver. Yeah, this idea that he is going to be silenced forever and shamed forever as well.
I was just going to say as well, with the fish and you were saying about innocence, well, it just reminds him of his childhood, doesn't it? I mean, I feel like what you do is you have this beautiful in-depth idea, and I'm sitting here like, yeah, well, basically, like, he sees the fish, it reminds him of his childhood, being happy with his dad, he goes home to go back to his kids.
I think the classic English teacher thing, didn't I?
Well, yours are better. And then I feel like I'm in with this really like stupid one after, like,
not at all.
Oh, it is. It's not as in-depth visuals.
That shows how well the poem works. Is that it works on a fairly straightforward level, but also a deeper level if you unpick it enough. It's kind of a good poem.
It works on a Miss Graham level and a Miss Gough level.
Sometimes I don't even know what I'm talking about myself, so, you know, just let me know if I'm waffling or, I don't know.
Don't be silly.
Right, third stanza.
Yeah.
I like the simile, like a huge flag, because that's, again, linking to the very first line, that idea of sunrise in the Japanese flag. We've got that symbol of patriotism coming through. And then we've got the symbol of infinity with the figure of 8. So that's a metaphor for how her father is meant to be on his way to the eternity of death, the journey into history. And it's reminding us again of the codes of honour that are enforced upon them, and the pressure that they face to lay down their lives in honour of their country. And that's exactly what soldiers do. So I think this is like a really nice poem to link to some of the other war ones too. It's this idea that you don't go... You go into these things knowing that you potentially could die, but you do it for the honour of your country, hoping that you're going to have peace in the event. Yeah, in the long run, I guess.
Could there also be? I'm literally trying to think it through myself. Figure of 8. That's also the infinity symbol, isn't it? So could that have like almost like a feeling of he can't escape? But then he realises he can.
It's going to go on forever. Well, yeah, if he goes to war, he dies. That's bad, as we all know. If he doesn't, then
he faces metaphorical death. Yeah.
Yeah. So for eternity, he is damned, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and then he goes in on the fourth stanza. It moves on to that remembrance, and we've got the cairns, haven't we? Built cairns of pearl grey pebbles, which are obviously resemble what are they called?
Gravestones.
That's the one. Can't think off the top of my head.
What's a cairn?
It's like a pile of stones, isn't it? Where they
stones.
Pile them up from largest to smallest at the top.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the pearl has connotations of hope, doesn't it? So it's like I don't know, maybe in his mind he thought, maybe if I break this honour, like, people will respect me, because I don't want to have to do this, because I am going to be hurting innocents as well. Maybe he was thinking of, like, his own family and thinking, what if I was that person that I'm now going to be killing as well? They've got family too. Maybe that's what was running through his mind there as well. So there's this, you've got the turbulence there, because it says the turbulent inrush of breakers bringing their father's boat safe. So the image of the sea, it's teeming with life. He's thinking of all the opportunities that lie ahead before him, and then you've got him, that image of death with the cairn and the burial mound, and he doesn't want that. It's almost like he's conflicted. He doesn't want to face his death so soon, and others' deaths as well.
I do like that. There's that pearl grey pebbles that you point out. Now the alliteration of that draws our attention a little. I would say there's something in the adjective pearl that suggests that when he looks at the home, it looks worth something. It's attractive, as pearls are. I would say as well, though, the word grey is interesting, because grey is often associated with death and dying. It's almost like if he is to go back there, it is to be grey for him. It looks like a pearl, but actually it's going to be a grey life to be alive. There's something oxymoronic in that pearl grey.
There is.
I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Which is reminiscent of the tragedy of the whole poem, I think.
Yeah, and it's like it brings it, that oxymoronic phrase it kind of links to that very last line as well, which Miss Graham's already alluded to, that he must have wondered which had been the better way to die. It's these questions we have ourselves in life, isn't it? Like the decisions you make and the consequences they can have. And I've actually, I should have mentioned this in the context bit, but Garland actually has made a statement before about poetry itself. And she said, poetry is a way of talking about how each of us sees, is touched by, grasps, and responds to our own different worlds and the people in them, which I thought was a really nice way to kind of think about, like, the preconceptions we have about other people, and not knowing actually their motivations behind things, because we don't know what motivated him. We can only speculate, just like his daughter. And
I think that's right. The best thing a poem can do is get you to challenge your preconceptions about other people, what you think that they're going through. That's what a lot of the best poems in these do. They shine a light on what we did not understand before.
Definitely. So we'll move on to the second half of the poem now. So from line 25, so we're on stanza 5 now.
This is the bit,
and that's when we notice the italics come in.
But see, this is the bit that confuses me. Not the italics, it's the bit after. It's the listing of the fish. I mean, I've written down on mine, I don't know where I've got this from, so this could be entirely wrong. Fish equals weakness and helplessness. I suppose because they would all be killed, right? His father was a fisherman. And maybe so when he sees them, when he has that memory, when his father's coming home with all these dead fish and that feeling of weakness and helplessness, or is it simply nostalgia? I don't know, but this whole stanza is pretty much a listing of fish.
Yeah.
I think nostalgia is one of them.
Yeah,
and sorry, Mr. Grimmett. You're right. It's when they do. That's what he's talking about. What happened to his own father and grandfather's experiences. When you take fish out of the sea, they do become useless and vulnerable because they die, don't they? They go all floppy and I don't know what I'm saying. But it's looking at all these different fish.
What?
Mr. Grimmett, take over. Take over.
Okay, right. Grandfather's boat. Who is the grandfather here? Quickly.
The grandfather to the pilot's daughter.
The grandfather to the. So it's the pilot's father.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So there's something there, isn't there? That his father made a living by getting fish and things from the sea and bringing them back, whereas he himself has to make a living by training to be a killing machine and sending himself to an early grave. We understand, I think, from this stanza a little bit about why this man is not capable of killing himself, because he's grown up with really his training is about catching fish, perhaps. And I think almost he is the Dark Prince, the tuna, the singular tuna, by the way, not Lot, just A, by himself, turning back. I don't know how he's muscular and dangerous, because he hasn't killed anybody. Presumably, he's dangerous to himself, to his own.
Is he dangerous to society because he brings shame?
Yes,
and
perhaps.
All about honour. Yeah.
Perhaps. Ironically, in the war he's fighting, perhaps the greatest danger to that family.
Yeah. And his decision's dangerous as well, because that's where we then get the first end stop line. So it's cut off from that point. They don't want anything to do with him.
That's right.
Well,
so it's
so I would argue to keep in that stanza if I had the option to take it out for that reason.
I just find that stanza, personally, I find it quite confusing. If I were a student going in, I would probably be avoiding quoting for that one, but I guess you can. You don't have to understand every single bit of imagery that she uses.
Is it talking about the mix of different people and experiences? I don't know. That might be a bit of a stretch. Obviously, as they would have been used in World War II. They would have been taken to go to obviously attack other people. So is it talking about the feathery prawns, black crabs, the loose silver of whitebait? Is that to do with different nationalities?
Unless,
I suppose,
could it be?
I don't know.
There's not much else in the poem to suggest that, though.
No.
Could it be a metaphor? Bear with me. So he's talking about his father's boat coming back, and it's got this fish on it that he remembers coming home as a child. Father's job was to kill the fish and then return home. If we are to push this really far, and again, I don't know if this is an overread, but his job is to go, presumably, World War II to Western culture, to kill. Could those...
But not come back.
But could the fish represent maybe the people that he would kill, a very, a diverse group of people that he would be going to kill, and he is the Dark Prince, muscular, and he makes a decision not to be that?
That does make sense, because those, as you said earlier, weakness in like the feathery prawns. If this guy did go out, he'd be killing innocent little feathery dude. I don't know.
But
I like that as a metaphor.
But even like the bit where it says the loose slither of whitebait. Well, if we're taking colour connotations throughout the entire thing, well, white is purity and innocence, no? And the tuna is dark.
That's right.
So could it be that is a metaphor for who he would kill, and he sees himself as the Dark Prince, full stop? The next time we hear he has come back.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. And obviously this is open. It's open to interpretation, but I like that. It seems like it makes more sense.
Miss Graham has persevered with a poem that she has been well under. Impressed with for a long time.
I'm unimpressed, but you two basically did the legwork, and then eventually I was like, maybe it's this, and finally, maybe I've got an understanding of that stanza.
You're that guy.
Yeah, you
the one where everyone does the work, and then you swoop in and you get the level 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how that works in an exam, but
no,
don't use that. Don't use that philosophy in an exam, guys.
No, it doesn't work like that. Right, for the final 2 stanzas then, this is where, and we'll talk about the structure a little bit more, but this is now the daughter speaking. And though he never came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence. So we're really thinking here about, in the anthology itself, we've got a range of different kind of ideas on war and impacts of war. And normally, when we think of the impact of war on families, we think of it in terms of loss and grief. But here, we see how deeply entrenched these values about duty and honour are, and how much they can cause familial conflict. So it's remarkable, and this is perhaps something that Garland's raising here, that a code of honour in your country has more staying power than the bond of family, that you would be prepared to shut yourself off from family because of what they've done. And yeah, it's I think it's really sad towards the end, this idea that the family are not grateful for his decision. Okay, they've still got their father, they've completely ostracised him, they don't want anything to do with him, and the influence that the mother has over her children and the daughter, it just seems really sad.
And the bit that always gets me is the first line of the final stanza, where it says, "Till gradually we too learn to be silent." And I think it's the adverb gradually, that because the innocence of children, only we children still chattered and laughed. Like they don't understand it. They're not young enough. They're too young. They're not old enough to understand it. And then the adverb gradually, that they come to terms with it. They are, and if Garland is being critical of this, I don't want to say society, but if this way of warfare, if she's being critical of that, then that gradually is them being socialised into this as a norm and learning that they can't speak to him, and actually that in itself is very heartbreaking.
Yeah. And the daughter, when you say like gradually, the use of that word there, and then he must have wondered. It's almost like she seems to show compassion. Well, she always tries to understand.
He uses the poet uses he must have wondered. That modal verb must is used earlier in the poem when the third person is saying like, I think it's looking on behalf of the daughter. Hang on, let me just look. It's in the second stanza. Third line, he must have looked far down, and then here we've got, where was it again? He must have wondered. I always wonder if that's like the daughter kind of, or the poet, whoever, kind of going, he must have had a reason, almost like questioning it, that like desperation, trying to find an answer.
Because the alternative is perhaps too painful for her to bear. Yeah.
And I think that final line is really important, because which had been the better way to die? I think one of the most heartbreaking things of this poem is that question is left with us. It's not answered. And of course, for us reading it, I feel that we all go, well, of course it's better that he dies an old man in his bed with his family. But actually for them, that's not the best way. And maybe for him, it would have been better if he had died that day. But
I think that's absolutely right. The most interesting thing about this poem is that it's a struggle to kind of work out how the poet feels about exactly what's happened. I think, like, again, in a lot of poems, a poet wants to present us with a dilemma and lets us figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah.
And here it's the same. I mean, is it better to put your family over your country, or is it better to put your country over your family? What is best?
And that really brings into question that AO3 context idea here, because it's not just about obviously historical context, it's also to do with that modern context. So the willingness for individuals to die for their beliefs is actually nothing new, and we still witness events in contemporary society. We see people, so I have actually got something here as well, a little bit more on context that will kind of link to this. So the precursors of today's suicide bombers are the kamikaze pilots. So they're prepared to die for their beliefs. There have been individuals willing to do that throughout history, even though we tend to think of it as a modern phenomenon. It's not. It's been around for centuries. So the young men driving lorries into crowds in more recent years are virtually identical to these kamikaze pilots, with rather less technology, obviously, at this time, to use at their disposal. They know that they will die at the end. So this is not something new, and it's something, obviously, we are projected this idea from the media, or obviously terrorism, and it's still thinking about that idea of believing in your belief so much so that you'd be prepared to die for it. Yeah,
I just think I think that it's such a tragic ending, and it's so tragic because we aren't left with an answer. We aren't left with a, you know, the pilot believed that he did the right thing, or the pilot was questioned. It's just like, which do you think was better? And we don't have an answer. The poet doesn't have an answer. No one seems to know what would have been better, except, I mean, maybe his wife would have been like, yeah, you should have died, but...
Yeah. I didn't like him. None of them liked him anyway.
Didn't really like him anyway.
They're annoying. He's really annoying. He's really loud eater.
Yeah, 40 years of extra meals I've got to make.
I was looking for a way to get rid of him.
Yeah. Oh God, he's back. Damn it.
We missed a joke there for the intro. Well, I haven't catered for you for the next 40 years.
Yeah, I'm back a really annoying guy.
Yeah, it's just so sad, isn't it? I think at the end.
Definitely.
I still don't like it, but.
We're going to move on to the structure now.
I have written down. I've actually got some structure notes. Would you believe?
Thank you.
I've got 7.
How long have we been doing this?
We have been doing this for 40 minutes. But structure's always quicker, isn't it?
We're only a third into it, guys. So hold on tightly.
No, we get through these bits quickly. Structure doesn't take as long.
They might fall asleep, so
structure never takes quite as long.
Yeah.
Right, so I've written it's in 7 regular stanzas, which very much replicates a military routine. However, where it's in free verse, I forget. I always get confused with free verse and blank verse. Is it blank verse where there's structure? I can't remember. I've written free verse.
But there's no set rhyme scheme.
There's no set rhyme scheme to it. No.
Blank verse might be the one you're after.
I thought blank verse. Oh, do you know what? Google it. We'll Google it as well, guys. But there's no set rhyme scheme to it. There's no set punctuation, as highlighted by the fact that it's in like 2 sentences, the whole thing. So even though it's in a very it's conflicted between being very structured and very unstructured in itself. So it's a conflict with itself. It's got this continued enjambment the whole way through, creates the pace of the pilot and his life spiralling out of control, but equally his stream of consciousness and his thought as he goes to his death, which he then ultimately chooses not to.
Yeah, I think it's free. I think it's in free verse, by the way. I think blank verse is in iambic pentameter without rhyming.
Thank you. I'd written free.
I say I think that. Obviously, I've looked that up on the internet. I'm not trying to get by pretending I remember.
Come on, guys, we should know this.
Yeah, I know. I always get them confused.
Year 11s won't have this. Won't have the Google in the exam.
To be fair, I'd written free verse, and then as I was...
they won't have their annotated books.
Normal, they have us. But I'd written free verse, and then gone. You know, as you were saying it, I was like, I don't know if that's right or not. Thank you, Mr. Grimmett. Thank you very much.
I've got that the form is a narrative poem. So we've got a story about a father who failed to complete a suicide mission. It's narrated mostly in the third person with some speech from the daughter. So we see that in the italics with the first person structure. Kind of like a report at the start, an overheard story told by someone else, which is why I linked it already to Ozymandias. What else was I going to say? We've already spoken about enjambment. Another important thing I want to bring about is on line 25, I've put that there's a volta and a question mark by it, because it brings the poem from a place of speculation to the reality of what happened upon her father's return. So it's gone from, obviously, what's happened, and it now moves, because although it's not fully in her story yet, we get, yes, grandfather's boat. It's almost like she's commenting on the story. It's that break with his thoughts and his nostalgia almost. So that's why.
Is that what's separated by the full stop? Sorry.
No, grandfather's boat.
The hyphens.
That's what I've put as the volta, because it's like a dreamlike quality has been broken there.
See, I've got
because it's direct speech.
I see what you mean. Interestingly, I've always put the volta between lines 30 and 31 when it goes fully into her narrative, because then it almost changes into memory fully. I always kind of viewed it, again, it kind of leads us with this question of who is this third person telling the story. In Ozymandias, it seems very much like it's Shelley, and there's context that would support that perhaps it is Shelley's voice. This could be Garland, but I feel it's almost like like the daughter's being interviewed and someone's writing down bits and pieces in that third person, but there the daughter just like butts in, grandfather's boat, like, or maybe even in the pilot, or even in the pilot's memory, like he's looking down at the ship and maybe he's remembering the time he told his daughter about the ship and hears her voice, grandfather's boat. Like, I don't know. Speculation.
Yeah, I think it becomes her story when it, after the word dangerous, doesn't it? It's like that's definitely what she knows, and she only knows a little bit from her point of view.
Tiny bit.
It's just the last two stanzas.
Well, the rest, I think she only knows about the bit when he came home. The rest of it, she's kind of going, she said he must have wandered. I don't think she knows anything. I don't think she knows what happened in that plane. It's all speculation. She just knows what happened when he came home.
It shows if it said he must, it just shows again that she hasn't even spoken to him or asked him as a result of not really being able to.
I don't think I've got anything else for structure.
No, I think that's everything I've got as well, to be fair. So just the links then. I've got to be honest, I said again before we started recording, I would really be dreading this one coming up if I was a student, because personally I don't like it very much. I would put it for, if it came out something like cultural conflict, which I don't know if they would give something like that because that's quite hard, but cultural conflict, I'd put it with checking out my history. Someone that feels conflicted with what they've been taught and what they've been told versus how they feel and what they think is important. So
that's a nice link.
That's where I would put a link, but I guess it's mostly war.
I think when comparing two poems, I think you can have one big idea, talk about the differences in that, so that's what you just mentioned. Then really, I think you can talk about language and then structure. And I think you can pretty much compare any poems, really. Because if you picked a random poem, like pick a random poem.
Checking out my history.
So checking out my history, what's the question?
How is a conflicted persona presented in checking out my history?
So the conflicted persona and checking out, the conflicted persona and checking out my history. Yeah. So you got what he's taught and what he wants to be taught.
Sorry, I went into
conflict there. Huh?
So I went into personas, probably like quite a high level vocab. It wouldn't be worded like that, would it? It would be something like
internal conflict.
Internal conflict is presented,
Internal conflict.
Right. So I suppose you've got that. It's kind of internal conflict, but here you've got loads of internal conflict. You've got the internal conflict probably of the daughter wanting to be with him and not being able to speak to him, learning to gradually step away. You've got the internal conflict which he must have gone through. Kind of reflected in all the fish changing and the changing direction and the flags and the implication of his shame and guilt and everything.
And then I guess could you talk about
the conflict of him and his society and his whole family?
And could you even mention something like the internal conflict that the reader is left with at the end, because we're at the end kind of questioning too, so we experience internal conflict too.
Absolutely. I think that's like a higher level way of looking at it. I think you can compare pretty much take this with anything.
Sorry, I'm feeling very proud of my level 9 answers today because I don't like this one.
The other thing I was going to say, because I've got a couple of poems that I'd link this to. So, Child of the Light Brigade in terms of patriotism. So the quote that really rings for me is "There's not to reason why, there's but to do or die." It's kind of the idea that you are meant to be honouring your country. Obviously, there's different ways of presenting it. In the two poems, but because of like the fact that this is power and conflict and war naturally comes into it, I've put down poppies, war photographer, remains, because you could look at the impacts of war, you could look at the effects on family, you could look at the effects of the individual, that if you wanted to be a little bit more broad. Bayonet charge would also come into that. I don't know if I said that. And one of the other ones I said is looking at, for more of a comparative, looking at how there isn't much violence in here, it's more nostalgia, and then you've got more graphic and violent imagery in something like Exposure, perhaps.
I think it's great. I think you compare it to any poem. How about that?
And then obviously Ozymandias, which you've already Ozymandias. What other poem even here that we haven't compared it to? Tissue.
Tissue.
I guess, yeah, you could potentially prefer it to that.
Who would do that?
What's the question?
In the beginning, I've chosen these two poems because they're the most difficult out of the anthology, and that is my comparison.
Shower marks upon me.
If anyone picked Tissue and Kamikaze, I'd be like, what are you doing? That's awful.
What's the question though? You got another question? What's the question?
How is internal conflict? I don't know.
Again, how is the power of people shown?
Do you know what I feel this is? I feel
How
this
is
is
the
like...
power of tissue and of fish?
Do you know what I feel like? This is like a game where I feel like if I give Mr. Grimmett any question, he's got to answer it.
I think that'd be a great game. Could we do that in a one-off?
One-off special. Well, should we do it? Because this is our last poem. Should we do a one-off special after, which is Test the Teacher, where we will just call out a question and a poem, and Mr. Grimmett's got to make a connection to any other one and make it convincing enough.
It's just me, so it has to be me alone.
We could take it in turns. We could get a little like roulette wheel thing going on the random name generator.
Yeah,
I
love it.
I think that'd be a good thing to do. So just comparing then, a comparing video where we just compare everything.
Yeah.
And then Miss Graham swoops in at the last minute with a level 9 worthy answer.
Level 9.
After I've heard you two build it up to that point.
Shames us all.
No, not at all.
Shame, man. Bring it back to the beginning. It's shame.
I think...
It's come full circle.
Oh, guys!
Just like him. Coming all the way back home.
Guys,
In a circle.
I feel we deserve a round of applause. We've done all 15 poems.
Well done, guys. You've done all of them. I just came in for the last few.
Miss Gough and I have done every single poem. Mr. Grimmett has done most of them. I feel very proud of us. And guys, I think next the call was for Christmas Carol, actually, to go through that one. I know there's a few teachers that have messaged me, said they're happy to do some Christmas Carol. No?
We could do Macbeth. There's also a musical on Macbeth.
Plug.
Shameless plug.
There is a wonderful Macbeth musical. I mean, I'm happy to do Macbeth next. Mr. Grimmett, as Key Stage 4 coordinator, what do you think would be best use of our time? Macbeth, since Year 10 are going to be doing it when they come in on their days?
I've got to make the decision now.
No, you don't have to make the decision now.
What? Can't we do Macbeth, then we'll do Christmas Carol coming up to Christmas?
Yeah, it's good with me, but... Yeah, it's good with me.
Yeah?
Yeah. Miss Gough will have to phone in.
I will. I'll still do it.
Yeah.
I'll still do it.
You're
You're not taking my face off that poster.
No. Right.
I'll be with you in spirit.
Dude, scribbled out.
Yeah. Right. It has been lovely. If we do maybe one more of our comparative game where we'll literally like just chuck a question at each other and we'll have to imagine all two questions, because remember we can have a choice in the exam, so that might be quite a nice idea if we like individually come up with some questions and then you give a teacher two.
Is there no choice?
Oh no, there's not a choice anymore. What am I talking about? That's the old GCSE, damn it. The old pre-2015, they had a choice. They could pick.
If Miss Graham's your teacher, I'm so sorry. She doesn't know what she's...
I've been in lockdown for 10 weeks. I'm just very confused.
No, it's hard, isn't it, when you're away? You kind of forget it all. But I'll tell you what, we could do a thing where two people get the same question, but we explain our different answers, maybe.
Yeah, I like it. We could do that. We could come up with a question. I'll click pause on the recording. We'll come up with our answers, and then we'll continue to record once we've planned.
That's a good idea, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, 5 minutes to plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because planning's very important.
It is.
Awesome. Right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you found that useful. 51 minutes. That is actually the longest one we've done. I'm actually a little bit embarrassed for.
Can you tell that we have really missed talking to each other?
Oh, I've actually just enjoyed having a chat with you both about literature. I've really missed this. This has been lovely. Hope you found this useful. As I say, we're not quite sure what we'll be going on to next. Probably Macbeth, as it turns out, once we've done our final poetry record. So hopefully you found this useful, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.